Hi, welcome to the 14-day weather forecast. Since my last update, we have had the second named storm of the season, Storm Bert. My word, did that bring some disruption. Strong winds and heavy rain in large parts of the United Kingdom, and it is continuing to make the headlines at the moment, even though the storm system has now moved away, thankfully. So, how are things shaping up as we head into December and the start of the meteorological winter? Let's see. Here's a view at 18 GMT, Tuesday the 26th. There's a small area of low pressure to the southwest, which is looking quite threatening, and high pressure centred to the northwest. As I run this, that area of low pressure scuttles eastwards, bringing some strong winds and heavy rain for a time to parts of England and Wales. Then high pressure builds and it's mostly dry, but into Friday and beyond, wet weather starts returning from the Atlantic as that high pressure declines. There is some uncertainty about the exact timing of this and the details from here onwards. A west or southwesterly flow though returns, so it doesn't look particularly cold. Areas of low pressure continue to bring a risk of showers, longer spells of rain as well. Strong winds at times, although it doesn't look like there's going to be a repeat of Bert, at least not through this period. Here's the upper air temperature and jet stream sequence. The blue shading there over the UK to start off with is indicating quite cold air aloft, at least over the north. The mottled shaded area is where the jet stream is tracking, and it's quite fragmented to begin with. I think as we head into December, it's well worth keeping an eye on how it develops, because in recent years, it's often the case, I suppose it always has often been the case, but more so in recent years, that this tends to become very strong across the North Atlantic, very flat, and once the jet stream locks into that profile, it can take some shifting. It often seems to persist through January, keeping the weather unsettled and mild across most of the UK, even into February. And that really has been the form horse in recent times. As I run this then, what we see is that the cold air is displaced, it turns milder, and then here's the jet. It's beginning to really rev up, it's stepping up and going through the gears there, and it looks like it's going quite flat. Not an ideal development if it is cold and wintry weather, which you're hoping for in the United Kingdom, more widely in Western Europe. Anyway, that's just one computer model run. Let's have a look at some of the service conditions which can be expected through this period. The charts here are generated using the UKV model rather than the GFS, which the previous two sequences were running from. This is Wednesday the 27th. You can see the area of low pressure bringing those outbreaks of rain moving across southern and central regions through the course of the day. It's quite chilly too, the maximum temperatures there on Wednesday afternoon. There have been some suggestions from one or two computer model runs that on the northern edge of this system there could be a little bit of sleet or wet snow. It may be something to look out for, although I think it does seem unlikely. This is rain all the way. Forwards to Thursday, it's quite a chilly picture across most areas, single figures everywhere, particularly cold there in the northern half of Britain, but frost at this stage could be quite widespread in the morning and the evening, patchy fog too. But if you look out to the west, signs of a change into Friday, and you can see on this UKV model run, we've got those outbreaks of rain steadily pushing eastwards, and they mark the boundary between the rather cold conditions and much mild ones. As you can see, Northern Ireland there reaching double figures, and parts of the southwest as this milder air follows in behind the outbreaks of rain. Windy as well at times, not as windy I think as we've had in recent days due to Storm Bert. This illustrates forecast gusts at midday on Friday. You can see around western coastal counties there could be gales, but there isn't a signal for a repeat of what we've just had. Into the weekend, and it's a lot milder now, much milder. That those outbreaks of rain have cleared eastwards, left rather a mixed picture of some brighter spells showing up in central and eastern counties, some showers of patchy spells of rain elsewhere. But the key takeout here really, I think, is the temperatures up to 14, 15, maybe 16 Celsius locally in the south. So almost as mild as we saw last weekend, if this is right. But it could well be the case that towards the end of the first week, temperatures are dipping again. This is the Mogreps G temperature forecast for the first, 192 hours it goes out to. So I've shaded out here, but what we can see is temperatures dip for a while, but then they trend upwards, and as I've indicated, it becomes mild through the weekend. But towards the end, there's a clear downwards trend there. So at least returning to average in the south, and I think in the north, there's a more pronounced signal for it to be a little bit colder at this point. Rainfall. Forecast aggregates here for days 0 to 5 from the ECM and GFS models. You can see there's some fairly significant amounts there, close to the south coast, into the southeastern corner and East Anglia. Those are mostly coming from that area of low pressure which scuttles eastwards at the start of the period. Also in the northwest there, some green shading indicating significant amounts of rain, and that's really a result of those Atlantic weather systems beginning to push in later on. Moving forwards to the 10-day aggregates, totals have increased everywhere, but the wettest conditions are clearly focused on the northwest, and that's suggesting an Atlantic-based pattern, so you wouldn't expect it to be especially cold over the period as a whole. In more general terms, how do the deterministic models compare with each other towards the end of the first week? Now, before I dive into them, I'm going to say these do throw a little bit of uncertainty into the mix, and here's why. This is the GFS on Tuesday, the 3rd of December. The UK's here. There are areas of low pressure close by. The green shading there over most of the country is indicating fairly typical upper air temperatures. But the Canadian model at the same time has some very cold air just pushing into northern Scotland at the same point, and even further south, some of that colder areas making some inroads. Now, the German icon also has very cold air to the north, but it's actually pushing a long way southwards. You can see there's a northerly flow here. It may well be a transient one. Nonetheless, there's much colder air making its way southwards. And the ECM model, often considered to be the very best, and the statistics back that up, has a ridge of high pressure which is building in from the west, but there's quite a lot of cold air trapped under it. Finally, the UK Met Office Global, very cold air here just pushing into northern Scotland, and it's quite cold even down in southern counties. So there's a lot of uncertainty, as I've highlighted towards the end of the first week, about how things are going to develop. The GFS looks unsettled with areas of low pressure bringing cloud, rain and the possibility of strong winds, but some of these other models are going for a colder incursion from the north. So I guess if I've got to summarise this, which I do every week, it would be that in the north there's a significant chance of it turning cold towards the end of the first week. In the south, temperatures may well be dipping, but they'll be closer to the average. Rain is possible through this period in all areas, and with that cold air in the north, you wouldn't discount the chance of there being some sleet or snow in the northern half of Britain, particularly, of course, over high ground. Even if it's systems which are just running in and bumping into that cold air, there could be a period of snow before the milder air returns. So lots to play for towards the end of the first week. How do things shape up as we go through week 2? Trends and probabilities only at this range, with all that uncertainty about how things are going to be at the end of week 1. It of course then follows that it's really not possible to be at all confident about how week 2 will play out. But let's see what the data suggests. This is the 16-day GEFS plot for London. 850 HPA temperatures across the top are fluctuating around the average. A thick purple line there, a little bit above the 30-year norm, a thick black line. It then dips below it later on. And there's a big spread of runs. Perhaps a key point here is that none of them bring cold air down over southern Britain and keep it locked in place. Some dip down significantly, but it looks fairly transient, so a changeable pattern being suggested. Likewise, along the bottom, a number of precipitation spikes. Well, there are quite a few, so the risk of rain is ongoing, and although I talk about precipitation at this time of year, the snow row there doesn't climb above 1, suggesting that anything falling from the skies in the south will be rain. 2-metre temperature data tables using the GEFS data for London, fairly close to the average, lots of light green in those columns. There isn't a clear trend, perhaps dipping towards the end of the second week, but it's quite a shallow dip if present there at all. The overnight lows, very, very similar. Some dark green, and that does actually increase a little bit later on, which would point towards a greater chance of ground frost towards the end of the second week. Now, I wanted to also show the ECM data tables for London. So this is a different model. This is the European ensemble as opposed to the GEFS, which is run in the United States. And there are some differences. There's, broadly speaking, quite a lot of consistency, but I think the ECM looks a little bit colder. You can see those columns is more dark green on the daytime maximums on the top. Also, quite a lot of blue appearing in the nighttime lows. Those are runs which would take temperatures down below freezing point. So, a little bit of a discrepancy there. Now, coming back to the GEFS data and going up to Manchester, the upper air temperature profile is very similar to the London one. Likewise, along the bottom, there are plenty of precipitation spikes. But this time, the snow row is a little bit higher. I think it reaches a maximum of 5 there. It can go up to 33. A low chance of snow falling, an even lower one of it accumulating, but not out of the question. The 2-metre temperature data tables for Manchester, lots of light green, 6 to 10 through the days, a bit of dark green. Overnight lows, a greater chance of it being cold enough at least for ground frost. 1 or 2 of the GEFS runs here take temperatures below freezing point. Up to Glasgow, and something slightly different here because the profile across the top for the upper air temperatures is really favouring them to be a little bit below the 30-year norm. There's a stronger signal here for a deviation from the average from there was in the previous ones. And lots of spikes there for precipitation through week 2. The snow row values, though, are higher, going up to, I think, 8 or 9, which suggests a low but not insignificant chance of snow falling. I would think, when you take into account the fact that those are on a daily basis, the chance of snow at least falling on 1 day or more through week 2 in this part of the world is actually quite high. But the snow row values, as I always point out, do not necessarily mean that snow will accumulate. There could just be a few flakes of snow mixed into the rain, a sleety, slushy mix. The 2-metre temperature data tables for Glasgow, maximums along the top there. More dark green shows up towards the end of the second week. Those are runs in the 1 to 5 Celsius maximum, so pretty cold. The overnight lows, something of the trend here is in the opposite direction because to begin with there's lots of blue, sub-zero runs. Later on the amount of blue decreases. It could be pointing towards a more unsettled pattern later. For example, a lot of these runs could be due to calm, relatively calm and quiet conditions, clear periods overnight, rather than the air mass being particularly cold. I thought this week it would be worth taking a look at the postage stamp charts for Friday the 6th of December. The one on the left is showing forecast maximum temperatures, the one on the right is showing pressure patterns, and the postage stamp charts show all of the individual runs from within the GEFS ensemble model. So it gives you a feel really for what the most likely scenario is, and they are very mixed. What I would conclude is, if you want to take a look at these in more detail, just freeze the video, but I'll go on to the summary and try and draw some conclusions. A positive NAO is favoured, so a positive North Atlantic oscillation pattern across the North Atlantic, of course, is being shown on most of those individual runs. That means pressure is higher over the Azores than it is over Iceland, leading to a west or a southwesterly pattern really for much of the period. With that said, surface conditions are varying a lot and some runs are bringing cold air into the north. Also, a number of them have high pressure, maintaining enough influence over southern and central regions to keep it cold at the surface, even though the air mass is quite mild. And finally, it's just worth pointing out that there are plenty of mild scenarios being shown by those postage stamp runs. The mean surface level pressure data table for York from the GEFS going through week 2 paints a very mixed pattern. Lots of green, lots of blue, fair amount of yellow, some orange. There isn't really a strong signal for low pressure or high pressure to be dominant through week 2, so it's not really possible to draw too many conclusions. And the snapshot pressure chart from the GEFS for Friday, the 6th of December, taken literally, is favouring a strong Atlantic flow, so the positive NAO I've just been discussing. There's a high pressure down to the south, low pressure parked near Iceland, very familiar, and the isobars relatively closely packed considering this is an ensemble mean rather than an individual run. It's masking though quite a lot of different outcomes as those postage stamp charts illustrated. So to summarise, week 1, wet weather moves across Wales and England at the start of the period. It then turns chilly and mostly dry with a risk of frost and fog. But towards the weekend, more unsettled weather begins to return from the west and temperatures climb. That said, by the end of the week, it could be turning colder once again, and there was a lot of uncertainty about the details by this point, with the deterministic model showing different scenarios. Week 2, changeable, probably wettest in the north, and snow is possible there at times, mostly over high ground, of course, so the Pennines, the Scottish mountains, but not only. Temperatures fluctuate, probably coldest in the north. That said, there is a chance of rather cold conditions in central and eastern parts of England if high pressure is a player at this range, and if that would also give a greater risk of frost and fog developing. So there we have it. It's a mixed picture through the next 2 weeks. Rain to start off with, then high pressure builds back in. It's quite chilly, milder air, looks like returning from the west through the first weekend. After that, a range of outcomes are possible. On balance though, there isn't a signal for a prolonged period of cold and wintry weather, but we could see some cold air flirting with the north at times, so snow not out of the question up there. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. As ever, then if you did, please consider hitting the like button below and subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. Of course, the best way to stay up to date with the day-to-day weather developments is by checking out the TheWeatherOutlook.com website. Thanks very much now. Bye.